Hello everyone and welcome back to another reaction video. Today we are continuing on Extra History series on the Conquest of India. Today we're doing part 3, the Black Hole. So without further ado, let's get going.
Calcutta, June 20th, 1756. It happened again. The EIC stepped over the line, and the local Indian ruler, in this case the Nawab of Bengal, has responded by capturing another British fort in another factory city. And just like the siege of Bombay, the Indians hope to make an example of the EIC. So the Nawab's men strip the surviving British soldiers naked and lock them in the fort's prison, a 14 by 18-foot room referred to as the Black Hole. British survivors claim that 146 prisoners were crammed inside at the same time and were held there, suffocating until the next morning.
That's a lot of people on that small of a surface. Yeah, it's no wonder people suffocated to death inside there.
When the prison door was opened, only 23 men remained alive. Given the EIC's history in India, the story of the Black Hole of Calcutta is a familiar disaster. Yet what makes this instance different was the British response, a response that would fundamentally alter the power in the subcontinent and send the Mughal Empire down the long road to ruin. Thanks so much to Ting Mobile for helping this historic tale come through loud and clear. After barely surviving the 17th century in India, in the 18th century, the British recovered a bit, managing to hold on to their coastal factories, the most important of which included Bombay in the west, Madras in the south, and Calcutta in the east. There, they generated a few million pounds of revenue each year through the exports of textiles, sugar, indigo, pepper, and saltpeter. However, much of this revenue was eaten up by the high expenses associated with combative trade located halfway across the world. So to compete with the VOC and other European trading companies, the EIC began to adopt a militarized corporate structure and built a fleet of East Indiamen sailing ships that combined speed, storage, and heavy armaments. This impressive fleet was supplemented with small armies made up of local mercenary soldiers trained in European style called sepoys.
Yes, it's at this time we are starting to see the militarization of the EIC. And imagine that if something like this happened today, where another mega corporation like, say, Apple or Nvidia started raising private armies out of nowhere. Yeah, that would be a worrying development, to say the least. And, I think with hindsight, we can all see that this was not a good sign for things to come.
Okay, so they got the money, they got the ships, they got the soldiers. This is where the conquering starts, right?
Well, not exactly. You see, even here, with this success, we run the risk of jumping to the conclusion without considering the context. Remember, at the beginning of the 18th century, the Mughal Empire's power was still at its zenith, holding sway over the subcontinent with armies that numbered in the tens of thousands. Also, we can't forget that the British at the time were still just one of many European states in the area. Case in point, consider the French, who entered the subcontinent scene at the end of the 17th century. At this moment in history, France is arguably the most powerful nation in Europe, but had a lot of catching up to do in terms of colonialism. Yet by the 1730s, the French, through their company the CIO, maintained revenues on par with the EIC, despite being in India for less than half the time as the British. So how did Britain go from being the underdogs to a foregone conclusion? Well, under the rule of Emperor Aurangzeb, the Mughal Empire reached its greatest size and strength, a state that stood shoulder to shoulder with the greatest empires the Western world had to offer. But it had one fatal flaw, which was hard to see in the 1700s because it was also the empire's greatest strength.
And here come the paradoxes, right?
Ding, 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 ding! Now you're getting it, Army! Aurangzeb and his ancestors built the Mughal Empire in a way very similar to the Mongol Empire from which they emerged. In this system, the Mughal emperors delegated much of the day-to-day rule over their huge empire to various local potentates, while they maintained control over big questions like trade and foreign policy.
Yes, and it's not hard to see how this system could be exploited by people, foreign invaders, or whatever you want to call them, who would, of course, do interventions. And, of course, like they said, this is a big strength. You can hand off administration to local rulers, and you can focus on the big stuff. And this system is stable, of course, as long as there is strong leadership in the central government. Now, the Europeans were trending the other ways. They were trending towards more centralization, which is a bit interesting considering what happened here. But yeah, this is what the British will eventually find out, that they can exploit this system of local rulers. You can influence one or two of them, and then you can influence one or two more, and so on and so forth, gradually undermining the central authority of the emperor.
The emperor would then provide military force and basic infrastructure to local leaders in return for consistent tribute payments, nearly always drawn from taxes on land.
It's a pretty
And
good
those
deal.
land taxes were the secret sauce of the Mughal Empire. Thanks to a huge population of cultivators paying taxes every year, the Mughal emperors possessed a constant and often expansive stream of cash. So, what could mess up this reliable system that's been doing quite well for the Mughals for a couple of centuries? Oh, hi European trading companies and privateered armies. Didn't see you there. These new corporate armies weren't interested in taking on the Mughal Empire. It was just too big and strong. Their main purpose was to protect European factories from other Europeans. But when they weren't busy fighting folks from their neck of the woods, these corporate armies were often rented out as fighting forces to local Indian leaders to make some extra coin. And these corporate sepoy armies offered a lot of advantages for local potentates. They were stationed close to their fiefdoms, made up of local troops that knew the land, and could be used without having to ask for help from the Mughal emperor. I mean, why travel all the way to the Mughal brick-and-mortar mercenary store when you could use EIC Prime with 2-day Soldier of Fortune free shipping? What could go wrong?
Yes, and why would you do that besides those advantages already listed? Well, you don't have to owe the emperor a thing. Because if you ask the emperor for help, he's gonna require a favor one day. Or he's gonna require more tribute payment, or something of the sort. So this is probably a cheaper way to do it, a more efficient way of doing things. But yeah, this opens, of course, the door for British influence in the region.
Now, the Mughal Empire might have been okay with this situation had they maintained their strength at a continental level. However, in 1707, Emperor Aurangzeb died and was replaced by a successive chain of ineffective leaders. This period led to a series of small wars between rival local rulers that in centuries past would have been snuffed early by a strong Mughal emperor re-establishing order. But that didn't happen in the early 18th century. And gradually, over a period that went on decades, local leaders began only paying lip service to the emperor while they formalized their own independent rule. A rule that was built upon European-trained mercenary armies. By the 1740s, it was clear that this situation would eventually spell doom for the Mughal Empire. But what was funny was that the European companies that were indirectly involved in this destabilization of the Mughal state weren't completely aware of their newfound power. Because from the perspective of the Dutch, the French, and the English, the main enemy was still each other. In fact, the thought of taking over for the Mughals only occurred by happenstance in Bengal. By the mid-18th century, Bengal had become the most important region in the subcontinent for the EIC, because it made up 75% of all of the EIC's exports and possessed abundant natural resources, a huge labor market, and a sophisticated merchant class. Consequentially, the British were incredibly eager to protect this golden goose, and they did so by building up their military forces and defenses in the region. The purpose of this military buildup was to protect the region for the EIC from the French. But in 1756, the Nawab of Bengal, Suraj-ud-Dowlah, objected to this because it risked war between two foreign armies in his homeland. After the Nawab expressed his displeasure, the French agreed to draw down their forces. But the British, fearing the French, decided to continue their work. So,
of course they did. Yes, at this point, the various East India companies are still more worried about each other than they are of the Indians. And the British, of course, are infamously suspicious towards the French. And still are, one could probably say, to various degrees at least. But yeah, so this is what really solidifies British control of this region, the various fortifications, the military build-up, and this allows them to use that power to project outwards later.
The Nawab responded by laying siege to the EIC factory of Calcutta, which led to the famous Black Hole incident. Now, in decades past, the British would have taken the L and asked for forgiveness. But the story of the Black Hole became fodder for sensationalist retellings throughout British India and Britain itself. And with each new version, the Black Hole became darker and holier. For the British, responding to this incident wasn't about exerting control, it was about serving out justice. An EIC force was dispatched from Madras in 1757 under the command of Colonel Robert Clive.
Yes, and you have to consider the fact that the Europeans, they thought of themselves as the most civilized, the most advanced, the most prestigious countries and citizens on Earth. And, you know, that was not really the case, but they thought of themselves that way. And now they have to show up and defend their honor, as it was.
Upon arriving in Bengal, this force was bolstered by men and funds supplied by local merchantmen, who valued their relationship with the EIC and were eager to see the Nawab not only punished for the Black Hole, but removed. And on June 23, 1757, just over a year after the whole Hole incident, Clive's numerically inferior but well-disciplined force defeated the army of the Nawab of Bengal at the Battle of Plassey. A week later, the Nawab was executed and replaced by a series of new Nawabs that the British hoped would
Here we
funnel
go.
funds their way. Eventually, however, these new leaders bristled at the EIC's incessant demands for cash, and in 1764, the then Nawab of Bengal, Mir Qasim, allied with the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II to try to oust the EIC from the province for good. But the company decisively defeated this combined force at the Battle of Buxar. Then, fearing that this defeat would lead to the collapse of his empire and hoping to secure British protection, Shah Alam II offered the EIC the most valuable thing in his kingdom, the Diwani, the right to be the emperor's official revenue collector in Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. In this,
That's a really huge concession, and it really shows you how desperate the central government is at this point, and it realizes the danger of the EIC. But this will only want them hungering for more.
way, the EIC went from being one of many companies clinging to the subcontinent to being the first European landlords in India. And it's at this point that we'll ask you all to put your anthropomorphic armchairs in their full and upright positions, because things are about to get rough. Okay.
Alright, that was The Conquest of India Part 3. As always, very insightful. I'm learning new things about the Conquest of India every time we watch one of these episodes, but I know there are some people in the comments who can provide me with some additional context, and I encourage you to do so. And if you like the video, please leave a like, subscribe, you know the drill, and I'll see you guys with Part 4 relatively soon. Until then.